The National Electrical Code, or NEC, section 334.15b states that cables and racers for circuits of 50 volts or more must be installed at least 8 feet above the finished floor. This requirement was introduced to the NEC in 1968. However, if the Romex installation predates 1968, it is typically exempt from this requirement under the existing work exception, as detailed in NEC section 90.3a. This means that if the original Romex wiring was installed before 1968, it does not necessarily need to be removed or altered simply because it is below 8 feet. It is essential to understand the concept of the existing work exception. This exception essentially allows installations that were compliant with the code at the time of their installation to remain, even if subsequent code changes would require a different approach. The rationale is that it would be impractical and unduly burdensome to require all existing electrical systems to be constantly upgraded to meet the latest code revisions. This exception is not a blanket waiver for unsafe conditions. If the existing wiring presents a safety hazard, such as damaged insulation or exposed conductors, it must be addressed regardless of its age. However, simply being below the 8-foot height requirement is not, in itself, a reason to require its removal if it was installed before the 1968 code change. Regarding service amperage, the NEC section 220.82 generally requires that the service ampacity be sufficient to supply the connected load. This means that the electrical service to a building must be capable of handling the total electrical demand of all the appliances, lighting, and other electrical equipment. However, the code does not specify minimum service ampacities based solely on the size of the house or the number of appliances. In other words, there is no specific rule that says a house of a certain square footage must have a 100 amp, 200 amp, or any other specific amp service. The required service ampacity must be calculated based on the actual connected load. This calculation involves adding up the amperage requirements of all the electrical devices in the building, taking into account any applicable demand factors. Demand factors allow for reductions in the total calculated load, recognizing that not all devices will be operating at their maximum capacity simultaneously. For example, the NEC allows for demand factors to be applied to general lighting, appliance circuits, and electric heating or air conditioning systems. It is incorrect to assume that an existing 60 amp service is automatically inadequate simply because it seems obvious to an inspector. The inspector must be able to provide a specific code reference to justify requiring an upgrade. Without a detailed load calculation demonstrating that the existing service is undersized, the inspector's opinion is not sufficient grounds for requiring an upgrade. If you disagree with an inspector's interpretation of the code, you have the right to request a review of their findings with the authority having jurisdiction, often called the AHJ. The AHJ is the entity responsible for enforcing the electrical code in a particular area. This could be a city, county, or state agency. To request a review, you typically need to submit a formal request in writing, outlining the specific issues you are disputing and the reasons why you believe the inspector's interpretation is incorrect. Be prepared to provide documentation and evidence to support your position. This might include copies of the relevant code sections, photographs of the existing installation, and calculations of the electrical load. When presenting your case to the AHJ, it is important to remain professional and respectful, even if you strongly disagree with the inspector's findings. Clearly and concisely explain your understanding of the code and why you believe it applies to your situation. In the case of the Romex height issue, explain the existing work exception and provide the code reference, which is NEC section 90.3a. In the case of the service amperage issue, explain that the code does not require a minimum service ampacity for a particular home size or appliance load, and that the existing service is adequate for the calculated load. It is also important to maintain a good working relationship with the inspector. Inspectors play a crucial role in ensuring electrical safety, and it is beneficial to have a positive working relationship with them. Try to understand their perspective and be willing to compromise when appropriate. In some cases, there may be valid safety concerns that need to be addressed, even if they are not explicitly required by the code. If the inspector is willing to work with you to find a solution that addresses those concerns without requiring unnecessary or costly upgrades, that can be a win-win situation. If you are unsure about the correct interpretation of the code, it is always advisable to seek clarification from the AHJ or a qualified electrical engineer. These professionals have extensive knowledge of the code and can provide guidance on how it applies to specific situations. They can also help you prepare documentation and evidence to support your position if you need to request a review of an inspector's findings. To summarize, firstly, the NEC requires cables to be above 8 feet, but this is an exception for older installations. Secondly, service amperage must meet connected load, not home size alone. Thirdly, request a review with the AHJ if you disagree with an inspector. Fourthly, documentation supporting your view is critical. Fifthly, maintain professional relationships with inspectors. Sixthly, if you have questions, seek qualified experts for advice. When dealing with existing electrical installations, it is important to consider the age of the installation and whether it was compliant with the code at the time it was installed. The existing work exception provides a degree of flexibility in these situations, but it is not a guarantee that all existing wiring is automatically grandfathered in. If there are safety concerns, they must be addressed regardless of the age of the installation. When it comes to service amperage, the code requires that the service be sufficient to supply the connected load, but it does not specify minimum ampacities based on arbitrary factors such as home size or number of appliances. The required service ampacity must be calculated based on the actual electrical demand of the building. If you believe that an inspector is misinterpreting the code, you have the right to request a review with the AHJ. Be prepared to provide documentation and evidence to support your position and maintain a professional and respectful attitude throughout the process. In addition to the specific issues discussed, it is important to be aware of other common code requirements for electrical installations in garages. These requirements are designed to ensure electrical safety in this potentially hazardous environment. For example, receptacles in garages must typically be ground fault circuit interrupter, or GFCI, protected. This is to protect against electric shock hazards in damp or wet locations. The NEC also has specific requirements for lighting in garages, including the type of fixtures that are permitted and the minimum amount of illumination that must be provided. Wiring methods in garages must also comply with specific requirements. For example, exposed wiring must be protected from physical damage. This can be achieved by using rigid metal conduit, intermediate metal conduit, or other approved wiring methods. It is important to consult the NEC and any applicable local amendments to ensure that all electrical work in a garage complies with the code. By understanding the code requirements and following best practices for electrical safety, you can help to prevent electrical hazards and ensure the safety of yourself and others. Remember to always disconnect power before working on any electrical circuits. Use appropriate safety equipment, such as insulated gloves and safety glasses. If you are not comfortable working on electrical systems, it is best to hire a qualified electrician. Working with electricity can be dangerous, and it is important to take all necessary precautions to prevent accidents. In addition to understanding the code requirements, it is also important to be aware of common electrical hazards. These hazards include electric shock, arc flash, and fire. Electric shock can occur when a person comes into contact with an energized conductor. The severity of the shock depends on the voltage, current, and duration of the exposure. Arc flash is a dangerous electrical explosion that can occur when there is a fault in an electrical circuit. Arc flash can cause severe burns, blindness, and even death. Electrical fires can be caused by overloaded circuits, faulty wiring, or damaged electrical equipment. It is important to take steps to prevent electrical fires, such as using the correct size of circuit breakers and fuses, and inspecting electrical wiring and equipment regularly. By being aware of these hazards and taking appropriate precautions, you can help to prevent electrical accidents. In summary, electrical work should always be performed in accordance with the NEC and any applicable local amendments. If you are unsure about any aspect of electrical work, it is best to consult with a qualified electrician. The NEC is a comprehensive set of rules and regulations designed to ensure electrical safety. It covers a wide range of topics, including wiring methods, overcurrent protection, grounding, and equipment installation. The NEC is updated every 3 years, so it is important to stay up to date on the latest changes. The NEC is not a law, but it is widely adopted by states and municipalities as the basis for their electrical codes. This means that electrical work must comply with the NEC in order to be considered safe and legal. The NEC is a complex document, and it can be difficult to understand all of its provisions. That is why it is important to have a thorough understanding of the code before performing any electrical work. There are many resources available to help you learn about the NEC. These resources include books, websites, and training courses. You can also consult with a qualified electrician or electrical engineer. By taking the time to learn about the NEC, you can help to ensure that your electrical work is safe and compliant with the code. In addition to the NEC, there may be other codes and regulations that apply to electrical work in your area. These codes and regulations may be adopted by the state, county, or city. It is important to be aware of these codes and regulations and to comply with them when performing electrical work. Some common examples of local electrical codes and regulations include requirements for permits, inspections, and licensing. Permits are typically required for any significant electrical work, such as installing a new circuit or replacing a service panel. Inspections are conducted by the AHJ to ensure that the electrical work complies with the code. Licensing is required for electricians who perform electrical work for hire. By complying with all applicable codes and regulations, you can help to ensure that your electrical work is safe and legal. It is also important to be aware of any specific requirements for electrical work in your area. These requirements may be related to the type of building, the occupancy, or the location. For example, there may be different requirements for electrical work in a residential building versus a commercial building. There may also be different requirements for electrical work in a hazardous location, such as a gas station or a chemical plant. By understanding the specific requirements for electrical work in your area, you can help to ensure that your electrical work is safe and compliant with the code. Finally, it is important to remember that electrical safety is everyone's responsibility. By following the code, using appropriate safety equipment, and being aware of electrical hazards, you can help to prevent electrical accidents and ensure the safety of yourself and others. Electricity is a powerful force, and it must be treated with respect. By taking the time to learn about electrical safety, you can help to protect yourself and others from harm. Therefore, when dealing with electrical inspections and potential code violations, always refer to the NEC and local AHJ guidelines.